Hello and good evening for, I think, the last time for this particular class. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you're seeing this. This is my dialogue, or excuse me, my discussion on week 8 on what was challenging. It was all pretty much challenging to the same high degree. So I'm going to speak on issues of diversity that were put into the class. I'm going to start out by quoting, I believe, her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And she pretty much makes this statement that without diversity, you tend to have this one linear kind of process of thought. And she talks about in her video the idea of, as a child, reading English and American books that had blonde hair and blue eyes. And at the age of 7, she started writing, and sure enough, her stories had blonde hair and blue eyes in their stories. And as she traveled abroad, as she got older, she would hear stories about her own country and how they had beautiful animals, but it was a people or a continent full of people dying of AIDS, civil war, and conflict. And she knew, coming from that tradition or coming from that cultural background, that just wasn't the case. And so I think that's highly important. I'd also like to bring up the idea of James Choang. And James, I think he bounces off of Amanje by saying there are two important factors as it relates to diversity work, and I agree with both of them. Matter of fact, the first one is you have to be able to cross cultures. You need to be able to engage with people that are different. That was one thing he said. The second thing he made mention of, you have to focus on a particular ethnicity, and that's an okay thing also. And so the work of diversity has two parts. Number one, it is integration of diversity. And number two, there's always this idea of focusing. And so it's the idea of reaching out to multiple people, bringing them in, and then creating spots within that inner group for things like ethnicity power groups, as in one of the questions that I tend to hear all the time doing diversity work is, why would people of color want to congregate by themselves, or why do they need to have a special meeting time? And that's because as you're doing the work of bringing folks in, there aren't many spaces within an organization where people can actually power up. Those are two really good points that I thought were highly important. What else? In the PDF entitled "Diversity in Nonprofits or on Nonprofits," there was a line that I'm going to read that I think was highly important. It says, a diverse board that is also sensitive to cultural differences is usually one that has a stronger capacity to attract and retain talented board members, as well as be in touch with the community needs. And again, I think that's a very, very important note, that number one, it isn't just so much about having diverse people, it's having high quality people that are diverse, not only in ethnicity, but also in thought also, and also social economics. But having the best of the best integrate attracts other people that are also wanting to engage in that also. And I think one last quote here, and this was from the other video. I can't remember her name. I think she was from Germany. It was also a TED Talk. And her quote was, if you want to see better as it relates to diversity, then we need to engage in strategies that are able to change systems. And I also agree with all the statements that were made in all the PDFs and all the videos as it relates to diversity work. I completely agree with. And so it's not only important to be able to create diversity teams, but then how do you go about doing so? Like, how do you go about doing so? And a lot of times what takes place is that individuals just say, well, you fit the bill either ethnically or gender or your social economic matches. We're just going to draw you in without having a real strong base of the job, which goes back to our writing out job performances and job outcomes. And this is the reason why, folks, we end up having to ask people to leave. That's a completely different thing. Back to the diversity. And so it's important that when you're forming and making and creating diversity teams, that you're getting the right people, right? No matter where they come from, they got to be the right people. And then also there needs to be this openness to see change, just very slightly. And I can talk about this a little bit. It's real thin. The idea of matching cultural norms in ministry. And I felt some knee-jerk reaction when I would hear individuals say, well, you don't match the culture, or you're just not a good fit because you don't match the culture. And so much of that tends to fall into rites, rituals, traditions, customs, and habits that get reinforced by rewards and sanctions. And so I'm just mindful of that. And that's all I'm going to say about that. That was the most impactful thing for me, were the topics on diversity. Take care. Peace.